Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today is a bit of a special video for you all. This is all about the world of Tirpitz. That's right, we went there. This is all about the, well, not so new Tier 8 premium German battleship, the Tirpitz. So, this is a particularly fond vessel for me. At least in my experience, as you can see, there's quite a bit of experience sitting on this ship, a little over 100,000 experience. It's good stuff, yes? Good stuff. So now we're going to spend a little bit of time before we get into our first game and split up this very long video into two parts. This first part, which is going to be about 20 minutes long or so, is all about the theory and some of my experiences, the upgrades, all the good stuff that is all prior thinking, prior setup before going into your first match with the Tirpitz. Let's just get this stuff out of the way. And at some point in the future, when I upload the second half of this little series in the world of Tirpitz, you can get right to the action and understand why the ship is performing the way it is. Or perhaps you could just go straight to that particular video if that's what interests you, and you're already an expert on the Tirpitz. Alright, so without further ado, let's start looking at some of the statistics, and then start explaining my experiences as each of the statistics is brought up. With a main battery firing range of 21.4 kilometers, that means that in practice with the 4 float planes, the spotting float planes that you can use on the Tirpitz, that you can squeeze out an extra 4.25 kilometers of firing range when you're using that ability, for a total of about 25 and 3/4 total firing range at maximum distance with these guns. And that means that these particularly fast-firing guns that you have on the Tirpitz can really extend their influence over a very broad area on the battlefield. And with the high shell velocities that you get on these 380 millimeter shell cannons, in practice you'll fire an extra round every 3 minutes over an equivalent American or Japanese battleship. That means that you can start affecting the flow of battle much more aggressively than the other two nations' battleships at the moment. And that means that this is not truly a battleship in the way it should be played. It should be played somewhere between a battleship and a heavy cruiser. And I'll go into that a little bit later on as we talking about gameplay. You'll notice that in exchange for the slightly lower or the slightly increased rate of fire, you have slightly less maximum AP shell damage. Now we're going to talk a little bit about that AP shell that we just mentioned. The slightly less damage that you're going to get out of these guns is due in part to the fact that in real life that the German 15-inch guns that were equipped on the Bismarck class fired a shell that was something like 66 kilograms lighter than equivalent 15-inch guns in the Royal Navy or similar ones throughout the world. And what this means is that they fly faster, but they lose penetration value as you go out in distance, at least in practice. And that means that you are going to have a certain maximum range where you can expect to get citadel penetrations against certain types of vessels, and you're going to have to master knowing when you can get off that citadel penetration. And this is going to change your dynamic with respect to how you load the ammunition choice in using this battleship, because with both the Japanese and the American battleships, because of the high weight in comparison to the shells that you have on the Tirpitz, they don't really care about the distance as much. So when you're firing at max range in the Tirpitz, you might be actually tempted to start loading the high explosive and just trying to incite all kinds of fiery goodness on your enemies, provided you're aiming at well-armored targets like enemy battleships. It's not to say that Citadel penetrations out to that distance are impossible, it's just that they are not a common occurrence. They have to hit a very weakly armored part of the deck to still have the energy to punch through the Citadel armor, protecting the vitals of enemy battleships, and you're going to have to weigh the return on investment for that extra shot that you've sent off. So that's a little bit of a quirk. The 257 meters of gun dispersion is, well, it's crap. But for some reason, these guns do seem to perform better. Well, they perform better even before the upgrade I chose for it, but they perform very, very well after the upgrade. I forget which modification number, I'll go over that in a bit. But it's very punchy guns. The secondary armaments are limited to about 4.5 kilometers. As you can see. So now the unique thing, right, at least right now, in terms of the Tirpitz in World of Warships, the Tirpitz has these 6-kilometer torpedoes, and located right here along the hull of the vessel, and there's one tube per, or set of tubes per side. Each launching has 4 torpedoes. And in practice, you can use this for any number of things, from defense against destroyers, dealing with enemy cruisers that get a little too frisky, and even tipping the scales on unsuspecting enemy battleships, because the Tirpitz is quite comfortable in brawling, unlike a lot of other battleships in the game, and that's got to do with the layout of the armor that protects its citadels. And in practice, you'll find that the enemy is more likely to citadel you from intermediate to long range than they are to do it from close range. At least that's what I've found. Its AA defense is not particularly fantastic, but it is serviceable and will get the job done. You should avoid solo action in this vessel, but it can cover itself from light air attack. It has a small host of weapons it can use in this capacity. Now, this thing is a little bit more sluggish than you're used to if you want to try to approach this from a heavy cruiser style type of play, but it does respond fairly well in comparison to some of the Japanese battleships in the game. With a 0.85 kilometer turning circle, a 16-second rudder shift time, that is pretty darn good actually. I think there's some cruisers in the game with worse. And a maximum speed of just essentially 31 knots. And because of that, it's a fast battleship. And it's a very nice one at that, in terms of using it. This ship has great concealment ratings for a battleship. I mean, it's huge. Where are you going to hide it? But that little logical point aside, being detected on the surface from under 15 kilometers with the concealment upgrade that I have currently fitted to the Tirpitz means that in practice the enemy will detect many heavy cruisers before they even detect this ship, provided I don't fire the guns. And air attacks against me because of that. The 13.3 kilometers detection range from the air mean that the enemy carriers will have slightly less time to plan out a very good airstrike against this ship. And trust me, if a carrier, as a carrier main, I can tell you that with the right loadout and someone who doesn't know what they're doing inside the Tirpitz, and provided I have the time to do it, to set up the proper run, I can basically just one, I don't know what the term would be, it was just one strike the Tirpitz from pretty much full health at tier 9. Not that surprising, but this is something that you need to factor into when laying out the skills and modifications you choose for the Tirpitz, because you are going to want to close distance, relatively close distance, not necessarily knife fighting distance, but close, maybe like 5 kilometers of the enemy, to deny them the opportunity to citadel you reliably in order to do best in this ship. So you're going to want to modify these detection ranges in your favor whenever possible. And in a sense, what you're going to create is a Romulan bird of prey going across the battlefield. So right now, let's go over some of the upgrades I've chosen for this. I've chosen main battery modification 1 because this is a battleship. You are not going to really get the full benefit of keeping your secondary batteries up or your AA guns up. This is the primary weapon you're going to want to keep operational at all times. I've not really had a big issue with any of the either two getting knocked out enough that I really care. I have also chosen to, for the second upgrade, to pursue gun fire control system modification 1, and this increases the accuracy of your main guns. And I know that's what it says, but it actually affects the maximum dispersion radius at maximum range. So in practice, this thing will actually start behaving a little bit closer to the orbital laser cannon we know as the Amagi, just with, I think, one less twin turret mounted onto the ship. And again, this is one of those, well, you could go argue that you want to increase the range of your AA guns or the secondary guns, and now you could also argue that you want to increase the turning radius, or not the turning radius, but the traverse speed of your main caliber guns. But I think that in this particular case, because you're adding that 10% loading time to the Tirpitz here, you're depriving yourself of one of the things that makes this ship special, at least right now, and that with its relatively quick reloads. And you know that although its turrets do turn relatively slowly, they're not the slowest turning battleship turrets in the game. And therefore, I look at it and go 15% traverse speed isn't going to buy you all that much. And if everyone else is forced to use this particular modification, adding that extra 10% load time only hurts you in terms of the effective rounds per minute you can shove down range, because if everyone else is using it and you're using it, well, then that relative difference is something like it's like 0.2 rounds per minute that you only have as an absolute bit there. But if everyone else is doing that, then what you have is something closer to about a half a round a minute fire superiority over them, which means that because the ship is somewhere between a battleship and a cruiser in its playstyle, the more rounds that you can shove down range onto target, the better off you'll be in the long run, because you're not going to always get those citadels, but you can reliably do about between 6,000 and 11,000 damage per volley, just with regular penetrations of the hull of enemy vessels without well-aimed salvos. And if you deprive yourself of that extra half a salvo every minute, well, you're going to see how that could add up over the course of a particular 5-minute engagement with the enemy. Especially when, in all likelihood, you're probably going to be scoring more hits than they are, and if you're doing it right, the enemy is going to have a particularly tough time trying to citadel you. And it's for this reason I've chosen the accuracy upgrade, because more consistent damage is probably preferred in this instance. And now, with this one, I've not had any bad luck with the propulsion or the steering getting knocked out on the Tirpitz, which is kind of ironic considering that the Tirpitz's sister ship, the Bismarck, was crippled by a single torpedo launched from a Swordfish torpedo bomber to her steering gears. Kind of ironic. And the propulsion is pretty much invulnerable in my experience. I've yet to lose propulsion in this ship. So I think that it's better to try to deny the enemy the chance to flood the ship or cause fire. It's not going to do much, but if it prevents a 1 fire in 20 or 1 flood in 30, I'm happy with that. Or 1 flood in 34, I think, is actually the odds on that. So, again, I don't really think that the steering gears modification here really buys us much, because 20% is not a lot on the Tirpitz. I mean, you're talking about 3.2 seconds at most, which, well, it will increase your ability to weave shots and things like that. If you're playing this ship right, you're probably not going to need it, and it might make the ship a little twitchier than it needs to be, and that can get you into trouble. And certainly, this one is a bit of a, do you want to start becoming a little bit more aggressive with your throttle controls? In my case, I don't really think that the acceleration curve on this is terrible, so I'm not certain that this is a necessary upgrade on this particular vessel, unlike maybe some stock Japanese battleships, or perhaps a New York class battleship. Just going to throw that out there, because that's what's come to mind. So I think that just having 15% less time while you're on fire or while you are flooding is a good way to go on this. It keeps you in the fight longer. It means that the long cooldowns on your damage control ability are not so crippling, because everyone fires torpedoes, everyone fires HE at this ship just because they're a certain amount afraid of it, or they don't know where to shoot it to pull off the magic shots. And lastly, there are 2 things on here. I can see why you might want to go with the target acquisition system on this. Adding that extra 20% range on there might be something you want to look into, but because of the nature of the guns not being as punchy at long range as they are at close range, I think that it's better to hide the vessel a little bit better and try to get them into close range, well, intermediate to close range area where the Tirpitz really does shine. And that should make sense, since One, these are faster firing guns than any other battleship, and it has these torpedoes as well. And in practice, you will note that it's very worthy of note that the armor belts that you see here and this nice, pretty, very pretty painted skin on there with that whole like German razzle dazzle on there are in practice very, very thick and can deny even the best penetration 8-inch guns that you can expect to find in game, even at extremely close range. Thank you for having bared with me for this fairly long theory crafting session all about the Tirpitz. I hope it was insightful or has given you some information about the vessel, either in how to approach it as an opponent or how to set up your own Tirpitz if you're interested in that. Please look forward to the other part of this World of Tirpitz series to come in the next day or so as I conclude recording my commentary on it. So please look forward to that. Did you see something in the video you didn't quite understand? Did I say something weird? Did I miss-say something? Please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you all have to think about this ship. If this video or other content on this channel interests you, please consider subscribing. And once again, we're at the end of this particular video. Thank you and good day.